Okay, this is the location. I'm kind of in muddy sand next to this river, but if you know me or any of my content, my name is Evan Strong, and I make videos and content like this geared around shoelacing and clothing, the discrepancies left and right within those and forward and back, and tying and lacing the shoes, and how all of that plays into and affects our body's natural mechanics, natural even rotations left to right, and ability to just work as a human body works, because we are all designed very close to identical. So, I've shown my shoelacing and tying technique a lot, and I will show it at least a little bit here for context of this video. It's definitely windy, but when I start at the bottom, go underneath, and then each time it crosses, it's the one that's on top is going toward the outside, and then it's the exact opposite for the left foot because it's the opposite side of your body. And then when we tie our shoes, they need to be tied evenly over to the insides with the knot. And check out my other content for more of a detailed explanation. I've got that in multiple places, but I've mentioned time and time again how the shoe lacing that we have within any shoe that we wear affects our entire body. But I feel like it's good to mention footwear, because I actually haven't, at least in my modern content here. So I have mentioned that anytime there's a heel on your shoe, and when I say heel, I just mean when your heel is at all higher than the ball of your foot or your toes, then that affects everything all the way up. What I'm gonna do right here, this is my normal stance. My feet are kind of up because it's going down towards the river, but this is my pretty normal stance. If there were anything under my heels at all, you can watch the rotation of my pelvis will go more anterior. My shoulders will then follow because my spine follows, and my head will then follow because your spine connects through your neck to your head, right? Your neck is your spine. All the way from here to here will be affected by any heel underneath your foot, but also the bend, the natural bend within your knees to stand in an active, open, internal, as I'm always describing, position will be affected. So I'm going to just lift my heels. It's not going to be exact as if I really did have a heel on my shoe, because I don't. But just watch the mechanics of my body all the way up, even from my knees, into my back, into my neck, into my head, and my shoulders. Watch what happens when I just lift my heels just slightly off the ground. Okay, now they're back down. Now they're up. Now they're back down. Now they're up. Now they're back down. And when I'm doing that, I'm only doing it about this much for probably about a running shoes type discrepancy from back to front, heel to toe, right? Probably about a ½ inch, okay? Probably. Right? So that travels up your entire body whenever we wear shoes. And as I mention all the time within my content, I'm coming from a place of experience, from a place of a deep understanding of the way that the human body naturally works. I never show routines, I never show exercises, at least until this point within my content. I never show how to do anything consciously. All that I do, all that I show is the natural function of the human body, the way that it is designed to work, and how to allow it to do that through the little modifications that I make through clothing and shoes, and the lacing mostly within the shoes. So that's important to say, because there's a lot of opinions, there's a lot of advice, and it's not quite correct. And I really do have a very, very deep and thorough understanding of how the human body just naturally operates, naturally would work in its form without clothing on. So I'm also wearing a fanny pack on one shoulder, and yes, I understand that is slightly uneven, I get it, but I'm doing it intentionally to try to correct the patterning that most every human is in from tying their shoes unevenly, right? So, and things traveling up within clothing that play into the same patterning. So, okay, that was mostly an intro. I'm going to discuss footwear because the reason I started saying what I was just saying is I wore 6-inch waterproof leather boots for about 4 years. If we're talking about every single day wear, it was probably 3 of those 4 years, like every single day. So I tied them unevenly, right, the same direction instead of over to the insides. And I also wrapped them around the back and brought them back to the front and tied them again, as a lot of people tie Converse, for example. I did that for, like I said, years. And that, plus the things that are just also within clothing that I show freely within my content, really put my body in a very, very bad patterning. So for context of time, I'm 25 right now. Those years were somewhere between ages 17 and 23-ish. I know I said it was like a 4-year span and maybe 3 like every day kind of years, but within there somewhere, 17 to 21 maybe, those years, I wore those boots just about every day, and they lasted. The boot was built to last. It was a good quality built boot, but it had a good inch heel, a Vibram sole. Nothing against the brand, but just if you know that sole, there was leather and then a thick sole with a heel, and then everything else I described within that boot. So I'm coming from experience when I talk about what footwear does to our bodies. So, because now I'm in the positioning and the natural, just about, condition that our bodies would be in through the things that I have personally done. I always want to show that I'm coming from a place of personal experience and of a deep understanding. As I mentioned, I try not to ever discuss anything that I don't know well. And I know the human body well and its functionality. So, ideally we have no discrepancy front to back in height on the sole of our shoes, because that will just alter, like I showed, everything all the way up. I always mention, think about if your body, again, we need to be modest, and out of modesty, if there was a way for us to have no clothing on and just the way that our body would function with zero restriction. And that's what my shoelacing and tying technique does, is allow our shoes to just fit as closely as they can, like a glove, if you will, for your hand. You want your glove to fit well so your hand works the way that your hand works with nothing on it. Same with our shoes, and that's what my lacing and tying technique allows to the best of its ability. There's still excess weight on our feet and excess stiffness, but out of protection, right? So when we're wondering what shoes are good for our feet, in the past year, I have just about solely only worn barefoot shoes. And I'm going to go into the shape of barefoot shoes because there's so much misconception around barefoot shoes. Misinformation, misleading, unintentional a lot of the times. People don't know. Again, I do know. I very much do know. I have shown in depth the functionality of the internal rotation of the feet that cause a natural healthy arch, and how that's an up and out with the weight on the outside of your foot. And there's a natural little bit outward curve, which you can kind of see. I'm on a little bit of an angle, but from the foot all the way through the ankle, through the knees, up the legs, which is actually an opening of the hips into internal rotation. I thoroughly understand the natural way our bodies work. I know it well. Okay, there's a lot of very, very, very poorly relayed or just totally incorrect information, and the reason that's so bad is people can just not know, and that's fine. But if people are listening to this information and applying these things, they're potentially actually kind of destroying their bodies through advice that was supposed to help them. So we need to have an understanding of what's a centered, natural body before we can do anything else. Okay, so when it comes to barefoot shoes, that's the style of shoe that I would say is the best for just about every case of every person. I don't know every person's situation, but from the functionality, skeletal system, muscular system of the way that humans are designed, which is universal to a degree, barefoot shoes, I would say, are the best footwear to allow our bodies to do what they would do naturally. And I love that there's barefoot shoes nowadays. I love that there's multiple companies that are trying to make them well. But I will say, I have personally owned barefoot shoes that are too wide. A lot of branding within barefoot shoe companies say that there's a wide toe box. And to a degree, that width is better than a lot of modern footwear that's actually too tight, and just anything that's too tight, you know, doesn't allow our body to do what it's naturally going to do by itself. But there is kind of a happy medium. Really, all that it is ideally just the shape of our natural foot. And as I've shown in depth in my content, the way that an arch works, I show with my hands like this because it's a gripping of the outside of the feet into an arch, into a natural, like I said, I want to slant, but into a natural, healthy position, an opening of the hips, internal rotation. And I've shown that in very, very great detail and depth of how that works. I very well understand it. A lot of people talk about barefoot shoes saying that the goal is to spread your toes. But I've mentioned internal rotation coming to the center line of our body. The nose, the sternum, the spine, all in the center is a closing. It's a closed position. Anytime you open, you fall, essentially. I use the term falling into external rotation because there's a natural healthy amount of external rotation and internal rotation, left to right. But if we're in a chronic until fixed state of external rotation, you can't stand, you can't balance, you can't lift your shoulders, you can't get vertical because you can't get in, right? Tucked in, active. I've demonstrated this many times, but it's important to be within this video for the sake of this content. So, if your toes spread, now you're just in a very poorly non-functional position. You can't move. Your toes spread, your arches collapse, your ankles go like in and out, flat, your knee does this, and again, a healthy, natural arch allows everything from there up to travel in an open, internal position. Your feet actually need to point in, slightly, okay? You've heard the term pigeon-toed before. It's actually, to a degree, just the way that our bodies would naturally work. I've mentioned and showed what it's like to land light and how it's on the outsides of our foot. And you can't land on the outside of your foot if your foot is pointing out, because then you'll potentially break something. You're gonna tear something in your knee, your ankle, because your arch cannot work unless it's in and gripped internally. So anytime anybody within barefoot shoe communities mention toe spreading, that is false information. That is very, very, very bad for your body. Very bad. Very bad for your body. So wide to a degree is good to allow room for your toes to be natural and be able to grip like I'm showing, like I'm just naturally doing. I'm quite bent over. I'm 6'2" but it's healthy because it's even, internal, and active, right? I can be on one foot, kind of like a martial artist position, right? I'm internal, I'm active as I'm bent over. So it's a healthy rounding of the spine, rounding of the shoulders, which is also a misconception that I've gone over to degrees in other content of mine. People will talk about how it's so bad to be rounded, but no, an evenness, active, is very, very healthy. So your toes should not spread, at least not chronically. They should be allowed to move in their natural positioning and function, but really they should grip. Because even though right now my feet are kind of pointed out, my toes and the ends of my feet are like this. They're in close together and gripped. I'm on like the very outsides of my feet as I'm bent over, inward like this. So that's why I always talk about internal rotation as an opening of the hips, an opening of the shoulders, wrapping around of the scapulas around the rib cage to allow it to open. That's how it's healthy when you're bent over like that. So most people just don't know that, because what's important to mention for the sake of this video again, that I've mentioned many times within my content, is removing the tags out of everything. And I've also gone into great depth, detail of what that does, including the tongue of your shoe. That's huge for this video. The tag that's within the tongue of your shoe must be removed to have a proper functioning body. That is an absolute prerequisite, and I've gone over why. It's a man-made synthetic material, it's plastic in some form, and your foot is trying to reject it, or your ankle is trying to reject it, which that will just collapse your arches anyway. So starting from that point, you will just have no idea where natural and normal is anyway. Again, not your fault, not the fault of a lot of shoe manufacturers, because it's just so common to place a tag there. That's just the spot that they've chosen for the past X amount of time, but it's detrimental to the human body. So your shoes should not be too wide. That is so damaging to your body. Barefoot shoes, like I said, is for the past year just about all that I've worn every single day that I've worn shoes. I love them, but they have to be at least narrow enough while still allowing room for your foot, that your foot does not slip outward. Because even if you lace and tie them with my technique, as I've shown in content and I briefly showed here, to allow them to get their natural gripped arch inward like this, to internal active rotation toward your center line, as I show, that's the reason I make content within all clothing and shoes. That's what I show how to do. Get out of our modern 2024 general chronic state of external rotation and into an active internal rotation. No matter if you lace and tie your shoes the way that I show with my technique, which is proper just to allow the foot to be natural, if your shoe is too wide, cinching your laces as tight as you possibly could around your foot, first of all, then it can't work naturally. Second of all, that does not change the width of the actual sole of the shoe, only the upper material tightness. So your feet, each step will still be able to slip outward if the forefoot of the shoe toe box is too wide. Because when I show to tie them evenly over to the insides to allow for this internal rotation, a natural working of the ankle, what's happening is when you step and you press off, your ankle is wanting to come out like this into internal rotation, right? A natural step. I've mentioned how the foot, the ankle, any part of your body only works in one way. There's no gym routines about training certain muscles by putting your body in any kind of position, because that's unnatural. It only has one way that it operates. There's bones, ligaments, tendons, muscles that connect in the ways that they connect, that work in the ways that they work. So when you step, naturally your ankle wants to kind of go out, right? Up and out, like the arch, like I'm showing. And if your toe box or like the forefoot of your shoe is too wide, your toes have the tendency to try to slip out to meet just the edge of the inside of the shoe. But when you get into your step, just in a natural like walking gait, as your ankle comes up, the knot being tied over to the inside is trying to push the ankle out, but the excess room that's just too wide within the toe box is trying to allow your toes to slip out. And so now your natural position is trying to combat this slippery inner sole of the shoe, because even if there's some grip within the like insole of your shoe, it's still, you know, potentially slippery toward the outside. So now it's this battle of opposites, the natural inward rotation in each step and the slipping outward of the toes. So now you could potentially actually injure your foot with your shoes laced and tied correctly, because the forefoot and toe box is too wide, allowing for excess room that doesn't allow for a natural working body. That might have been slightly long-winded, and that might have been more than most people in their current understanding would even be able to wrap their head around. That's okay, but I want to give that depth of explanation so that I can show I actually know what I'm talking about, for the sake of giving safe, healthy advice. Okay, so yes. You can't really see my feet, but when I'm talking about like stepping up onto something, it's an up and out, right? Like that. I mean, if my hand were on something and I tried to push up, again, internal rotation of the shoulders is the same, essentially, because it travels up, as internal rotation of the hips or the ankles. And that's a very natural thing. So if I were to push up on something, you can try it yourself. If you're sitting at like a picnic table or a countertop, you try to push yourself up with your hands pointed out, you feel so much discomfort because it's just an unnatural position. But if you round your hands in, then you can really push. Think about like if you've ever done any kind of workouts or seen workout routines, if you've seen diamond push-ups, that's a very healthy position for your shoulders. If you were to go like this, things will start to bind up because it's just not a position where your scapulas can wrap around your rib cage. So there's similar things going on down here. If your foot is out, then your hip is binding up. And I've shown this in other content, but for the sake of discussing shoes, it's important to put in here also, because you have to get in and up on the outside of your foot to allow for an arch, to allow those outer toes to grip, to open the hips, just like opening the shoulder. It's all the same, it travels up. So really what I was saying within that was I love barefoot shoes so much, but there's so much terrible body damaging advice about spreading the toes. That puts you in a position you cannot function well. Naturally, you have internal active positioning, right? There's a rock that I jumped onto. Just kind of to show you have balance, you have centeredness, you have groundedness, you have activation throughout the entirety of your body that has to, if you are ever vertical on your own feet, or even prosthetic legs that have shoes, you have to lace them and tie them with, I know it's bold, not that I'm correct, but that what I do is correct, my technique, the lacing and tying that I show to get internal and open with the arches of your feet. So maybe that was my cue that it's just about time to close this out. because I don't want to be redundant with my information. Although, if you haven't seen my other content, this is information that I'm giving freely just to help people, to give them truth about the functionality of the human body. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with having it in multiple videos. But as far as footwear goes, that's about it. Flat, even from toe to heel, ideally pretty flexible but quite stiff sole, and not too wide. I think that's the biggest point in this video, is barefoot shoe information that's actually true. I love them. I love barefoot shoes, but not to call out certain manufacturers, yet most manufacturers have their sole shape that they stick to for just about every one of their shoes, and a lot of them are way too wide at the toe box. So now I've given you an actual visual and a full in-depth explanation out of truth of the functionality that our bodies would naturally have as to why it's important to not have too wide of barefoot shoes. I guess that's what this video is. Barefoot shoes and how a lot are too wide. Okay, my name is Evan Strong. I make content like this. Normally it's geared around clothing, pants, shirts, things up here that play into our bodies, because I don't want to give the impression that after watching my content you need to go buy something new. What I try to do is show all that we can do within our own clothing that we already own, slight little tweaks, slight little snips with scissors, taking all the tags out of everything stemming from the shoes. And when it comes to shoes, I just show my lacing and tying technique is generally all I talk about with shoes. So I have content that I've already posted, a lot of great information. Again, I try to only talk about things that I know well, so that I can actually fully describe it in the way that it's actually happening. And I've got more to come. I'm going to start designing clothing, and that's going to be a from scratch type of thing for me, because I've just about never used a sewing machine since 7th grade. I took a very introduction sewing class. So my whole goal with designing any kind of clothing is to just allow our bodies to do what they would naturally do, as do pretty well barefoot shoes, as long as, again, they are the correct width. So I'm appreciative for barefoot shoes, very, very much so. And they are actually, as I've mentioned, what got me into my journey with this. About a year and a half ago, I bought my first pair of barefoot shoes, and they got me thinking about how my feet then felt more uneven because there was less material within the shoe, so the laces had a greater effect. And I started playing with lacing techniques, finally landed on this about a year later, just about, and the tying evenly over to the insides is essential. Tying mostly goes into rotation, lacing mostly goes into allowing room for the natural arch, which also plays into rotation. So, yes, I have more content to come, no guarantees on when or what, but I'm going to be designing clothing, so yes, a lot of it will be placed here. Barefoot shoes, highly, highly, highly would be a recommendation of mine. I love them, but it's important to understand before you buy them what is going on, or you could potentially damage your feet more by wearing them, with your feet going into an even more chronic state of external rotation until fixed. So yes, okay, thank you, stick around, got plenty to come. Shout out to nature, because it's beautiful. So yes, all right, stick around.